Well, here we go with part three. It looks like there are going to be four parts to this critique for the depth of field. So let's get right with it so we can move on. Hang on. Here we go. Well, we start with certainly a maximum depth of field, and there's a heck of a field in front of us, but we can't tell what it is. This shot really needs some help in a lot of different ways, but it starts out with needing some serious help in terms of initial exposure. And this could have been dealt with really pretty well in a camera by adjusting the contrast. Or now, let's go and see what we might have been able to do from Camera Raw. Now, this is already processed as a JPEG, so we've got limited amounts of things we can do here. But just to give you an idea, first of all, let's bring the exposure down because we are quite a bit overexposed. And now we're going to bring the highlights down. We're going to start dropping that part of the contrast. And you can tell there is detail in here. Whether or not we'll ever be able to bring it out is another story. I'm going to heighten the contrast just a little. I'm going to bring the shadows up to bring those mountains back up since we dropped them. The whites up and the blacks down. And we're starting to be, not only do we have some tonality in the sky, but we are starting to bring in all this little foliage sticking up out of this snowfield. So it's possible that this shot could have been pulled out in Camera Raw, where we would have a lot more ability to deal with it than we do here. You can see here the exposure is off. So when you've got these shots, and I'm going to pull this off to the side a little bit so we can look over its shoulder and see the original. So here's what we've been able to do so far. We could bring this white back up if we need to, but the comparison between these two is enormous. This was in the shot. This possibly could have pulled out. So I'm going to say, okay, just so we can see it. And then we've got an interesting shot where the foreground and the sky are virtually equal value. Which one is the shot about? Since the foreground does not mirror the sky, they really are two different worlds. The shot needs to pick one or the other. There isn't enough interest in the sky to really pick it, but there really isn't enough interest in the foreground to pick it either because of the lack of detail. So this needed a little bit of work from the start. It does show deep depth of field. You got that part nailed. So I'll give you that part. Let's go to look at our next one. Well, this is interesting. Is this the Matterhorn at Disneyland? I don't know. This is really an interesting shot of sorts. Again, we have an issue with the sky. What maybe you guys ought to consider investing in for your cameras, if you're going to continue doing a lot of shots like we've put in this assignment, is a polarizing filter. So you can start helping with that sky. We can use the luminosity filter to bring it down a bit. But first of all, this is right smack in the center. Let's see if we can give it a little more oomph. What side should we take? Well, this is really pretty cool. We've got a lot of detail in this neat-looking tree. This is interesting, but it's dark. Well, let's see. Suppose, and we certainly don't need all of that sky. So what's going to work best? This side, maybe with this lamp right there, or, oops, wrong thing. Or this side. Again, with the lamp in one of those centers. This becomes pretty stylistic. For me, I'm going to take the red tree just because I like the red tree. I don't know that this side is actually any better than the other, but let's take it. So we've got that. Now, if we can bring that sky down a little with our luminosity trick, we make a duplicate layer. We turn the layer style into luminosity. And go up to Image, Adjustments, Black and White. And that sky looks mostly cyan to me, so let's see what happens. Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, once again, I'm going to take this too far so you can see it. This is JPEG artifacting that's creating this banding that's in the sky. So that's the problem of, if you're shooting in JPEG to begin with, this is a problem. For us, it's not, because you could go back to the original, but I'm going to bring that down just a little. And bring let's see if we can lighten that tree some to put a little life in it. Bring up the yellows a touch. Okay, so we can make it a little more exciting, not quite so static looking, with a couple of quick little trips. And that luminosity layer is really a handy way to work. So let's see what else we have. Well, I'll be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what to make of this. I mean, obviously it's a candle, and it has to be minimum depth of field, because only one of the wicks in this candle is sharp and the rest are way out of focus. But other than just an attempt to go in and say, okay, let me get as shallow a shot as I can, which you succeeded in doing, I'm not sure what the shot is supposed to be telling me about anything, really. So it's a fascinating demonstration that you can open the camera up and get minimal depth of field, but the photograph is, in and of itself, is really not saying much. Oh, and then we have two that I'm going to race over fairly quickly because they show the effect, sort of, but it's not what was asked for. Here's a minimum depth of field where this original Coke can here in the front is sharp and everything behind it is soft. Okay, fine. This is supposed to be deep depth of field, and maximum depth of field should have gotten all of it in focus, but this doesn't have the background. It doesn't have the foreground. But most importantly, what it doesn't have was the instructions which were to find two different scenes, each of which was best rendered by, in one case, minimum depth of field, in another case, maximum depth of field. That didn't happen here. So you did get minimum depth of field. That part worked. You did not get maximum depth of field, so that didn't work. And the instruction part didn't work too well. So let's move on. Here's a nice little tableau. Is this the Japanese garden at Balboa Park? It's a good use for maximum depth of field. It really has shown pretty much this whole walkway through here. This is a nice shot. The only thing I would suggest, there are two little elements in here that are a touch distracting. One are these two little highlights here. I'm not sure in this case I would want to crop this down. I know, what a surprise. But what would you do with them? Well, what I would do with them is darken them or put some foliage in it. So in this case here, we don't really know what these trees are, and this isn't where we're looking anyway. We're going to be looking right in here. So I'm going to grab some of this and fill that in. And I'm going to grab this area and fill that in, just to darken it down so it isn't quite as visible or isn't quite as noticeable. And the other area that's a problem is we've got Mr. Tourist, or maybe it's Mr. Gardener, I don't know. But if he was important to the shot, we should have shown him in it, and he should be out working. So we're going to get rid of him too. And I'm going to grab some of this dirt area up in here. I'm going to pick up another area here. The problem with cloning something out is you end up creating staggered but repeated designs. By picking up stuff from various places, we can do this and we're not repeating any of this design, so it's not as obvious what we've done. The rest of the shot is really quite nice. Definitely shows maximum depth of field and shows off this little grove nicely. By the way, you could have argued we could come in here and darken these as well, and that's possible. Really pay attention. It's those little, tiny, often overlooked things that will make the difference between a good shot and a great shot. Okay, let's go on. Well, we have a nice sculpture, another graveyard sculpture. And this one is this angel sleeping. I have to tell you a quick aside. Having female angels in cemeteries has always intrigued me. The concept of angels comes from several different religions, but most notably from the Judeo-Christian side. And in no case was there ever a female angel. In none of the religions, actually, but especially in Judeo-Christian religion, several of the angels are named. They are all males. In fact, it must have been a shortage of females because one of the prohibitions was against coming down and playing with the human women and creating the race of giants that were kind of a problem. Well, anyway, that aside, this is a nice female angel figure with wings. Again, look all around it. If this is our shot, if this is where you want the viewer to look, you need some of the tombstones to make sure that we understand that this is a graveyard. You don't need this. This is a problem. This is taking your eye away from it. So again, here comes Mr. Crop. Since the direction is really going this way, towards green left, I'm going to move this in, which also helps me get rid of this figure. And I'm going to bring this in just a little bit. Take that. And now we've gotten rid of a lot of the distracting elements. I would get my clone tool and get rid of that simply by picking up some of this foliage. And I would do the same here, just to tone it down. I don't want anything taking me away from this angel in this face. Okay, so a good use of minimal depth of field. You did a nice job with this. So let's move on. Well, we have the landscape looking into the far different distance, rather. Well, this is another case. From what I can see in this JPEG version, I believe there's a lot of information in here that is actually in the file that in the camera raw conversion could have been brought out. So I'm going to go in Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And let's see what we can do here. First thing I'm going to do is bring this highlights down. Okay, so we do have something up in that sky. Now I'm going to bring the contrast up a little, the exposure up a little, and the shadows up a little, and that hopefully will bring back my bushes to some degree. I'm going to bring the whites down again. Let's add a little clarity for some sharpness and a little vibrance. Oh yeah, we can put some tone back in there. Now, what can we do with that? Well, let's see what we've got. Let's go ahead and take that. And now we can take a look and go, here was our original. Here was just using Camera Raw. Now we've got some stuff that we could work with in Photoshop. We could play with this sky. We could bring that down a little bit. We can even add some evening color to it if we wanted to. There's a bunch of stuff we could do to play with this now that we've got a good overall exposure. Although it's supposed to be deep depth of field, I'm noticing this plant is not sharp. So you've got to watch the entire viewfinder when you're doing this. It's so easy to look right in here, right into the center part, and just be kind of roughly aware, well, this kind of looks like it's sharp, and these branches kind of look like they're sharp, and not see the stuff down in the dark parts and on the rest of the image. So you've really got to pay attention to that. I'll bet this is at almost the same spot. And here we have a minimal depth of field, this time looking through the bushes into the sunlight on the meadows and the fields beyond. Here's where your shot is, right in here. This is very good minimal depth of field. But it is so busy, it's so complex that it's really hard. You almost need to drop the background down even more so that this really stands out. Because this kind of busy little frilly detail is very difficult because of the way it blends into stuff in the background. It's hard to separate out. So you've just got to be wary of that. And again, your real shot is in here. We've got a whole lot of stuff here that is so busy. I think we can make this a little stronger if we don't have so much of it. So if we came down into here, now I moved that in because I did not want this little line that's taking us back out of the image. So I'm coming in and moving into that. Okay, I'm going to take that. Now I'm looking through it. Same scene, but now I'm getting a better sense of what's going on here. Now, could I do something with the sky? I'll bet I could. What would be, I'm just going to arbitrarily pick a color. This is going to be a choice of mine, not necessarily yours. But if I thought that sky color could be, I don't know, something like this. Very light blue, early morning blue. It's still a lot of sunlight. It's still kind of washed out. If I don't lay some tone in here, I can't play with tones later. So I need to lay something in here. Do you remember our old friend, the darken brush? So with that color in the brush, if I set it to darken and make sure I have a really soft brush, which I do, so I don't have to worry about blending all of that in there. Now I can lay some of that tone in, and it's not overwriting this because these are darker than that blue is. As it turns out, so is the skyline, so there's no real worry. And I can put a little bit of variation in that so it looks like maybe there's some clouds, and create a fairly reasonable looking early morning that's going to contrast with this. Now let me do one more thing with this. This should be nice and golden in here because of this low angle of the sun. So let's make another layer. I'm going to come down onto this bottom layer. That's the one I'm going to work on. And I'm going to do several things to it. A little more than I normally would. Number one, I'm going to bring up the yellow saturation. Oh, look at that. Wow. I may want to do that to more than just the bushes. That's kind of cool. That's just pulling up tone that is there, by the way. Then I'm going to grab my curves. I'm going to lighten that yellow, bring down the shadows so I've got some good contrast. Let's go back up to this top layer. I'm going to blend those together a little bit. About half. Now I'm going to pick a layer mask with a black brush, and I'm going to set this all the way up. I'm going to bring out that yellow. And with that, let me flatten this. I'm going to make a snapshot of it. Here was our starting one. And there's what we've turned this into, fairly simply. So all of this material is in there. All you have to do is bring it out a little bit, and it'll be fine. So play with this. Okay, let's get rid of this one, and we'll go on. Well, this is a really nice shot of the, I'm assuming this is the owner of the facilities that we're looking at. You've picked a shot of extraordinary contrast. I mean, the brights are just beyond bright, and the that sunlight on these light colored areas, like on the house, on the walls, is really blowing out a lot of this. The minimum depth of field works pretty well, although it would have been maybe nicer if this had been even a little more out of focus. But let's try something here. Let's, first of all, and remember I told you when you're working on things like this, deal with things one at a time. First of all, I'm going to bring the overall exposure down, and then I'm going to bring him back out of it. So I'm going to go to multiply, and I'm going to drop that opacity. I'm only picking up about 10%. There's none. There's just a little. What I love about doing things this way is the subtlety with which you can bring things back. And now with the layer mask and my black brush, I'm going to set it to maybe 70%. I can bring some of this back. Now, if I want to really maintain all of this to show that it's part of my story, this man maintains all of this gardening stuff, and this is all part of his story. If it was just about him and that extra story wasn't there, then I would again crop this in a lot tighter. But let's say that the story really demands this sense of place, but it doesn't demand the detail. So now, we're going to flatten this. We're going to make another layer, duplicate layer. We're down on the bottom layer. We're going to look at it, work on it, and we're going to build in a little bit of selective depth of field ourselves. So we'll go into I'm going to try the lens blur here because I want this really to look more like something is a little out of focus rather than just soft. And I want to go a little more than I want, a little more effect really than I'm going to need in the end. Ooh, I forgot we're at low res. In a high res you can bring up some noise just to make it more realistic, but Okay, so I'm going to say okay. Here's my top layer. Here's my bottom layer. Now, if you were looking down on this as a plan, the closer something is to you, the more out of focus it would be. So what we're going to do is we'll go up to our sharp layer here. We'll make it a layer mask. And we're going to set our brush down to, maybe 25%. And we'll make this first one big enough to sweep this first plane. Now, to get that progressive feel, we're going to make it big enough to go over what we already did again, but now for the first time, go over this one. And now what we can create, I'm just using the very edge of this brush to soften that rose bush. Now what we can create is a set or a sense of like a lens increase in depth of field. Look over here on this icon. You can see how this is blended. Now, if we decided, here's why I like using the layer mask. If we decided this was too much, we've looked at it, we thought, well, okay, fine, maybe, but maybe this is a little much in here. Now all we have to do to correct that is to go back to a white brush. Let's make it nice and small. Again, we're going to set this down fairly low. And come back through, and we can just sharpen that a little bit. So we've got infinite control over guiding your eye into the sharp subject. This works because our brain has an interesting problem with out of focus things. It really, really, really wants to focus on everything. When it sees an area that it cannot focus on, there's a small pain signal from the optic nerve, and it looks away, and it tries to find stuff that's sharp. So it's naturally going to go into these areas that are sharp. These softer areas become more just surrounding tone and areas that give you a sense, well, it's a plant. Okay, I can sort of look out of the side of my eyes and see that, and then move on into the major part. Now I think I would crop it just a little. Not a whole lot. Because I want to make him just a little bigger in all of this. I don't need any more of this plant to tell me that it's a plant and it's in this corner. All right. Is that it? Let me see. I guess that was it. We'll be back for the next part.